So the next thing is this. When you and this is information that I got from James Clear, who's the author of Atomic Habits. So I never I never actually read his book, but a number of years ago, I think I listened to an interview with him, and his argument was very compelling, and it had a significant impact on my outlook in life. So he argues, among many other things, that habits are very important, and that habits depend upon basically four factors. So in order for something to be habitual, or at least in order to establish a habit, it needs to be obvious, attractive, easy, and rewarding. And conversely, if you want to change a habit, then you want to make it the opposite of that. You want to make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and non-rewarding. So these are just some simple, very practical things that you can keep in mind in order to change your behavior. So if you think about the things that you're doing, the behaviors that you're doing that you want to change, you want to stop doing those things. Well, what are some things that you can do to make them invisible? So if you don't see or think, or otherwise, if they're basically invisible to you, then you won't progress. So give you an example. So a lot of people struggle with, they're just mindlessly scrolling on their phone for hours a day. So that might be an example of a habitual behavior that a person might want to change. Well, now, where do most people keep their phones? Like, in their pocket or on their desk in front of them or whatever, right? I mean, it's obvious, it's right there. So they don't, it's constantly there reminding them of it. So if you wanted to change that habit, you would want to make it invisible. What does that mean? Well, no, I mean, first of all, you could consider getting rid of the phone. Some people think, oh, that's impossible. Well, 20 years ago, amazingly, people lived without the things, right? I mean, so it is possible. But if you're not willing to do that, at the very least, you could put it somewhere out of sight, right? I mean, this is such a simple thing, but it's very effective. So if you just put it somewhere where it's out of sight, like away from you, far away from you. So the things, whatever the things are that if you just put them somewhere where you're not going to see them, with like the phone, maybe you choose to use the phone sometimes, fine, but you don't need to have it in front of you or in your pocket at all times in order to use it sometimes, right? Like you could say, okay, I use the phone from 3 to 4 p.m. every day. Great. Where are you going to keep it the rest of the time? Perhaps you could put it at the back of a drawer somewhere in a box in some part of your house where you otherwise don't go. Therefore, you're not going to be seeing it and thinking about it all the time. You can make it difficult. So difficult would be using the example of the phone. So it's easy if the phone is not only right there, but it's also on, right? So then you're like, well, it's on. I'll grab it and I'll scroll because it's easy. I don't have to cover the attractive part because it's like the phone is designed to be attractive. There are companies that are spending a lot of money to make it very, very attractive to you. So there's not a lot that you're going to be able to do about that other than you could like take all the apps off of it. That would make it less attractive. But then you could make it more difficult by turning it off. Just a little thing that's in your way that makes it a little bit more difficult. You'd be amazed how just a little bit more difficulty can make a big difference. So if you, in order to do the thing that activity, if there's an obstacle that makes it more difficult, you're less likely to do it. With the example of the phone, if you just have it off, because you think about how long does it take to turn it on? Not that long, but long enough that it's more difficult. That if in your brain the impulse is, I'm bored, I'm going to reach for the phone and scroll. It's worked every other time, I'm going to do it now. But then you're like, oh, but it's off. I'd have to turn it on and wait. You're like, okay, what would I rather do instead? Just that little bit of a pause allows your brain to think of something different. You're like, what would I rather do instead? Maybe instead I'd rather go for a walk. Maybe instead I'd rather go connect with another human being. Maybe instead I'd rather just stretch. Maybe instead I'd like to drink a glass of water. So those are some suggestions that can make a big difference. And then you can also, for the things that you want to do instead. So initially, when you're going to make a change, so your brain resists change by and large because it requires energy. Making changes requires energy. And so we tend to want to conserve energy by just continuing to do the same things because those patterns are already there. The patterns already exist. So you can save a lot of energy in many ways in the short run by just continuing to use the existing patterns. So there's a built-in conservative function in your nervous system that says avoid change because change requires more conscious awareness. I actually have to pay attention and learn something. And your brain says, that's hard. That requires more energy. Let's not do that. Let's just keep doing the same things. They've been working well enough. And then it's like, reach for the phone, look at porn, smoke a cigarette. Why? Because the pattern's there. So in the short term, it conserves energy just to rely upon the existing pattern because otherwise you have to be conscious and learn something. And that requires more energy initially. So in order to help yourself to make doing the new thing more likely, you can make that obvious, attractive, easy, and rewarding. So a lot of the time what happens is because it's something new, something that we have not done yet, or at least we have not done it in the way that we would like to be doing it, we're trying to bite off more than we can chew initially. It would be like trying to run before you've walked. And so a lot of things are like that. That creates resistance for us. But think about it this way. What can you do to make it more bite size? So that will make it easier if it's more bite size. You also want to make it obvious. So by obvious, it would be like, okay, introduce this into something else that's already a habit. So if you have some existing habit, which you do because your whole life is composed of habits, introduce this alongside with some other existing habit. It's like that's why it's really easy to introduce new habits first thing in the morning because your morning starts by the same thing every single morning. You wake up. And that's the very first thing that starts your day. It's the most powerful thing because it's the first thing. So whatever you pair with that, boy, you get a lot of leverage with that because it's the very first thing. But you can do that with anything in your life. So if with anything that's already happening, if you pair that with something else that you're wanting to introduce, some new thing, then it becomes more obvious to you because the existing habit now becomes the thing that reminds you of the new thing you want to do. So for example, how many, if you wanted to run every day, you wanted to establish a habit of running. Well, you could get some running shoes if you wanted to run with shoes. I don't know, maybe you wouldn't want to run with shoes, but if you wanted to run with shoes, you get running shoes and then put them somewhere that you're likely to see them. So if you said, I want every day before I start work, I usually mindlessly scroll on my phone for an hour. And instead, I would like to run. Okay, great. So what is the cue? What's the thing that prompts mindlessly scrolling on your phone? Put the shoes there. Put the phone somewhere else. See how that works? Put the phone in the back of a drawer somewhere in the other part of the house. Put your shoes in that place that normally would otherwise have signaled you to start scrolling on your phone. Then you've got to make it easy for yourself and attractive. So attractive in the case of the running, maybe you say, well, I'd like to, maybe initially you have resistance. You're like, oh, running, that's going to be hard. Well, then that's not very attractive, is it? What if you said, well, there's this podcast I really like listening to. and I'm going to listen to that while I'm running. Well, suddenly it becomes more attractive. So you want to do things to make it more attractive. And then easy is say, well, gee, running sounds hard. Okay, then that's not easy. Well, what would make it easy? Well, figure that out, right? So if you're thinking that it's hard, well, you're thinking about it in a way that's hard. So is it hard to lace up your shoes? No. Is it hard to go out the door? No. At what point does it become hard? It's like, well, after after 10 minutes, it becomes hard. Okay, guess what? Run for 5 minutes. Suddenly it becomes easy. So if you chunk it down so that it becomes easy, then you're much more likely to do it. So you've identified the things that you want, what you actually want instead, and then I'm encouraging you to think about how you can formulate that for yourself so that it becomes obvious, attractive, easy, and rewarding. Because otherwise, you're likely to have resistance to it. So just think about it that way.